Here we are again, Kim. I'm here with Kim Casey Campbell, who is the author of her second book, her first solo book, Flying in the Face of Fear. And I'm so excited to talk to you today. And I'm so excited that you just launched the book and things are going already really well.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me back, Mary. I appreciate it.
Oh, it is my pleasure. So tell me, what was the impetus for writing this book?
That's a good question. I think for so long, I have been on the receiving end of people sharing their stories with me and their lessons learned. And over time, I've realized how important those stories are and the experiences and the lessons learned. And as I spent time at the Air Force Academy as the director for the Center for Character and Leadership Development, I realized how much those stories that I was sharing with the cadets made a difference and an impact for them. And it's just this idea that I think we can help others, we can lift others by sharing our own experiences, those lessons learned, even when they talk about mistakes or weaknesses, right? Which can be a little bit uncomfortable, but I think those things help make other people better. And so it was time to put it down on paper and stop talking about what I had been thinking about for a while and actually just get it done.
Well, that's amazing. And you referenced sharing of stories. And the way we met was you were sharing a story on a stage doing a keynote, and your story was so powerful. And I love that it's, woven into the words in your book. But tell us about your background and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah. I decided very early on in my life that I wanted to be a fighter pilot. And I think that, that really kind of set this turning point for me throughout my career. I made the decision in fifth grade. It was actually after watching the launch of the Space Shuttle Challenger. And I realized that those astronauts died doing something that they believed in, something that was big and important, something that was more important than themselves, and something that they were willing to risk their lives for. And so that's kind of where my path started on this completely separate journey from what I was doing, but wanted to be an astronaut and decided that going to the Air Force Academy and becoming a fighter pilot was kind of the groundwork for that. And that's really where I got my start. I mean, from then on out, I was totally committed to achieving my dream, and really exciting to see it happen, although it didn't go as smoothly as I would have liked. I mean, there were ups and downs and trials along the way, but that's the thing, right? We set these goals and dreams and they don't always happen in the way we plan, right? Sometimes our path doesn't take the path that we want it to take and it meanders along the way, but it took a lot of hard work, a lot of effort, but eventually achieved my dream of becoming a fighter pilot, becoming an A-10 pilot, which is a close air support aircraft, and spent about 20 years flying the A-10 Warthog, 24 years in the Air Force, spending time flying, but also as a leader and commander of teams, and just recently retired about a year and a half ago now, after 24 years of service in the Air Force.
Wow. Well, thank you again for your service. But what an exciting journey. And, you mentioned that there were meanderings along the way. I
Yeah.
mean, I think that's the most exciting part because to me, that's the times that build character.
Yes, absolutely. I think, I think one of them happened very early on in my career because I had this goal of going to the Air Force Academy. And after doing absolutely everything that I could and working hard and getting good grades and being in all these different activities and playing sports, I got a rejection letter from the academy. And I mean, this was like the first blow, right? This was where I had this plan, I had this path, and getting that rejection letter was really, I don't know, devastating for me just because I had worked so hard to get there. But at the same time, it was again a kind of this life-changing moment of do I quit and just, okay, well, they said no and quit, or do I keep after my goals and dreams? And thankfully, I had mentors around me. I had parents and teachers and coaches who were really supportive of me. And they encouraged me to keep going after it. So that was really just a turning point for me of I didn't quit. I kept after it. I wrote the Air Force Academy a letter every week to let them know that I was still wanted to attend. And eventually, after about a month of letter writing, and some improvement on my ACT scores, I eventually got an appointment to the academy. But that built character. That showed me what happens when you face adversity and how you can overcome, but also the importance of surrounding yourselves with some people that are going to support you and challenge you and encourage you um, to achieve your dreams, even when it's hard.
I mean, talk about perseverance and resilience. You nailed that right at a very young age.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and not by myself, right? I had help.
Yeah.
It's hard to know if I didn't have that support network around me, what would the difference be? I'm not sure.
Right. Well, luckily we don't have to even think about that because look at how far you've come, right?
Yeah.
And then we teach others, who come up behind us that stuff matters.
Well, now as a senior leader, having spent time, serving in the military, but now also doing executive coaching, it's being on the other side of it, right? When our team and people on our team face adversity or failure, it's being their support network and encouraging them and challenging them. So now I am on the other side and I see how important it is.
Yeah, it is of the utmost importance because if you're not teaching people to own their failure, they're hiding it,
Yeah.
right? And that becomes very dangerous, I'm guessing, especially in the Air Force.
Yeah, and we talk about that a lot in our debriefs. So after we fly a mission, we will sit down and do a debrief after every mission, and we talk about our objectives. We also talk about where we didn't do so well on those objectives. We'll talk about the good things, right? The things that we did well and that we want to repeat, but we really drill down into the mistakes, why they happened. We encourage, especially our young wingmen, to take ownership as we do. And we are supposed to set the example with that of taking ownership of those mistakes, those failures, and then learning from, 'em, right? You want to take ownership, but you also want to learn from them. You want to be able to say, yep, that was wrong. Here's what I learned, and here's what I'm going to do differently the next time.
Yes, it's all about learning and improving and doing that every step of the journey, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So the title of your book is Flying in the Face of Fear. Tell
Yeah.
us about what that means to you.
It's a little bit funny because I was really hesitant to use the word fear in the title initially, and I got some feedback that maybe it wouldn't be received as well for just different groups of people. And I realized that, it's not about fear, right? It is about flying in the face of fear. It is about stepping up to take action in the face of fear. It's about doing things even when you're afraid. And it's this idea that, yes, my story starts with this life-changing uh, combat mission over Baghdad um, that had some pretty significant implications, but it doesn't always have to be this life or death experience. It is just about fear itself, right? Fear of change, fear of the unknown, fear of not meeting expectations, fear of failure. It's all of those things. And we all face these fears. But most of the time, we don't want to admit it. And I'm guilty of that. I did not want to admit that I was scared. It's still hard for me, right? When I have those moments of fear, anxiety, or stress. But it's all about what you do in those moments that matters the most. And I think it's just a constant reminder that you can't actually have courage without fear. And so it's trying to normalize this idea of fear, and it's all about what you do that matters. And so that's the idea behind the book. And then the subtitle is A Fighter Pilot's Lessons on Leading with Courage. And so the book digs into 12 chapters, 12 ideas on how to lead with courage, how to do things that will help ideally make you a better leader and make a bigger impact on your team.
Yes, yes. And the whole time that, every time I talk to you, every time I hear your stories, I think, wow, how courageous. And that is exactly what you're talking about is this courage to move through it, face it, and take action. And
Yeah.
that is, talk about, as we say, your life lessons that you're bringing to the world are so important.
Yeah.
So,
And I think that's the thing. Like, being a leader takes courage. It is hard because you're going to make mistakes or your team is going to make mistakes. I probably should say, there are going to be failures along the way. There are going to be hard conversations to have with your team There are going to be times where you don't have all the information and you still need to make a decision. There are going to be times where you're going to have to sit down and have a really tough debrief. There are also going to be times where you have to have the personal courage to show some vulnerability and connect with your team and create that environment of trust that sometimes can be really hard to create. And I think all of those things take courage, but we often lose sight of that. And, we get in this idea that, you know, courage sometimes is these big overarching things that can happen when in all reality, it's just about taking small actions in the face of fear. That's all it is. It's just stepping up to take action to do the hard things, embrace the fear.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. The way you say it, sounds so brave too.
I mean, it is, right? If you have to go have a conversation with your boss or a coworker, and it's a tough conversation, maybe you're providing some negative feedback or, some learning points. And that's a hard thing to do. And a lot of times, I don't know, we don't have the courage and we decide not to have the conversation. And then what happens? Then the person doesn't have the opportunity to improve. So it's just a different way of looking at it, I think, of just realizing that it does take courage sometimes to do those things.
And it's interesting, we talk at our MVP coaching practice a lot about humane leaders.
Yeah.
And it's really, we're speaking the same language in that those leaders are not afraid to be vulnerable. They have empathy. They
Yeah.
they do the hard things, just like you're talking about.
Yeah, that's one of the things I talk a lot about in the book. When I talk about my opportunities to really lead and command large teams, I initially went in my very first leadership opportunity with this mindset of like, I have to set the example. I have to, I'm a combat proven fighter pilot. I need to be this tough leader, tough exterior and be the leader that that I thought everyone expected me to be. Um, and then at my very first opportunity to be in front of my team, which was our change of command ceremony, um, my 3-year-old son was there, and he wasn't as excited about the ceremony as I was. And so, about 15 minutes into the ceremony, he's just decided that he's totally bored out of his mind. I can completely tell. I'm up on the stage and I'm watching him, and I can just tell he's just bored out of his mind. And so I give him that little smile, and then he stands up. And I'm kind of like, what are you doing? You're 3 years old. Now you're standing up. And at this point, my new boss is giving a speech about the importance of leadership or something. And I just can't focus on anything that he's talking about because my son is now taking these very slow steps, getting closer and closer to the stage. And I'm nervous about what my team is thinking because not proper military protocol. And I'm supposed to take command of 150 people. And I clearly cannot control my 3-year-old son. But he takes a few more steps. He eventually comes right up on stage and then hops down right in my lap. And there's this moment of like, I look down at him and he's just so content to sit there. But, I'm nervous, right? My heart is pounding. My mind is racing. I'm trying to figure out, oh my gosh, what is my team going to think of me in this very proper military ceremony? And my son is here on my lap. And then it's just like this moment of realization as I look down at him because I realize that it's important for me, for my team to see me for who I am, that I'm
Mhm.
not perfect. I don't have all the answers. I clearly have my own challenges. And it's this idea of having the courage to show that human side of leadership, to be authentic to who you are. And for me, yeah, I was a mom. I was a fighter pilot. I was a wife. I was leader. I was all of these things. And I realized in that moment with my son on my lap how important it was for my team to just see me for who I was. And then after the ceremony, like it turned out it was the highlight for everyone. Like they just thought it was the greatest thing. And it actually connected me more with my team in a way that I think if we had the very formal, proper ceremony, I probably wouldn't have had those early connections. And so it was a turning point for me. I realized it was all about being authentic and true to who I was and creating connections and building trust. And then, you still have to be able to do the hard things, but start with warmth, start with trustworthiness and approachability, and then it can evolve from there.
Yes. I mean, I heard you tell that story almost a year ago. And
Yeah.
you know, between the stories of, your actual combat missions and then that story at the end, laughter and tears and everything in between. And it makes you more approachable. It
Yeah.
makes you more human. And
Yeah.
that's people want to be led by humans that they respect, right?
Yeah. And I think that's the thing. Sometimes leaders in organizations, especially very large ones, there is this perception that they're up on a pedestal that
Yeah.
they, that, oh, I can't give them feedback. Or if I raise my hand and say, hey, this is not going well over here, that it just, there's this sometimes perception that, leaders aren't touchable, that they, we can't tell them the bad news. And I mean, that doesn't create for a good organization at all. I mean, we want to be in a position where our youngest, least experienced, lowest members of an organization will be willing to share their ideas, to provide feedback. But that
Yes.
is on the leader to start that. Leaders at all levels, not just at the top, but leaders at all levels to help create that environment of trust and set the example.
I agree. I agree. And you have a lot of experience leading. You've led teams of over 1,000 people.
Mhm.
Tell us how you created success in leading that big of a team. What were the other things that you did to kind of get everybody to, stand behind you?
Yeah, it's much harder in a large organization, and in the smaller organizations, I would love to be able to know everybody's names and know about them, and it just got much harder as the teams got bigger. But I still decided that even though I don't have that good of a memory, I could not remember everybody's names, and they swapped out so frequently. But I still made an effort. I just didn't do it very well all the time. But I really tried to, and my units were dispersed, so 1,000 people, but spread out many different countries and locations. So I really just tried when I went to visit each of them to spend time walking around, just talking to people, not a formal setting. We would do that occasionally. But I realized that just walking around and letting them show me what they do, that are those are those moments where I created connections, just walking around and letting them teach me what they do. I had civil engineers and they taught me how to drive a front loader. I wasn't very good at it, but they at least, the youngest airman, the youngest member of the team hopped up to show me how to drive it. I had firefighters in Honduras that let me join in their burn house, which is a controlled fire, but got to put the suit on, practice with the fire hose. Those moments of just being vulnerable, because there's a little ego in there of like, if I don't do this well, what is it going to look like?
Yeah.
But it created connections. It allowed them to teach me and show me what they do and show me their expertise. But also in those moments, I could figure out where their pain points were, right? Where were they struggling? And what could I do to help? And then following through, right? There's nothing worse than going out and talking to people and they tell you about a problem and you don't follow back up. So really making an effort to do that. But again, it's just taking the time to connect with people on a human level. To me, that was so important. And those are the moments where I think I gain the most as a person and as a leader. Just hearing from them and listening to them, it made an impact, even on a team of that scale.
Absolutely. And I love it because the advice we give to our CEOs is walk the floors.
Yeah.
Walk the floors. That's where the connection happens, is in those moments. And you
Yes.
were walking the floors.
Yeah.
Really, truly.
Walk the floors on the day shift. If there's a night shift or a weekend shift, whatever it is, make sure you're touching all those points.
Mhm.
And just really just taking the time to walk around. I used to block my schedule. I had to block it on my calendar. I would block time to just walk around, because otherwise the emails, the paperwork, it can often get in the way. And so it's just critical. I think it is so important. And it's so valuable to get the feedback and to create that environment where people feel safe, like they could give you some feedback. They could give you some different ideas. To me, it was very powerful as a leader to be able to connect with my team and to hear from the lowest levels of an organization about what they were thinking and feeling.
Yes, that's beautiful. And it makes you a better leader
Yeah. Oh,
in
for sure.
all ways, right?
Yeah.
Talk to us about, how do you stay calm under pressure? You've had a lot of very stressful situations in your career.
Yeah. I think the good thing for me is I've had excellent examples growing up as a fighter pilot and some really crazy situations where I've had some incredible leaders just be so calm. Um, when I was over Baghdad providing close air support and my airplane was hit with a surface to air missile, um, I don't know that I, in that moment, was very calm and composed. I was just doing my best to just survive and rely on my training. But my wingman was incredibly calm and composed. For me, my adrenaline is pumping, my heart is racing, my airplane is out of control. I'm just trying to get the airplane under control. And my wingman is out there just very calm, very composed, and very directive, providing me that guidance, right? Just telling me the things that I needed to hear when I didn't have the situational awareness for it.
Mm.
He just had this calming demeanor of, even though so many things were going wrong, like just hearing his voice and being calm and like he knew what to do just gave me some additional confidence. That was probably the extreme of seeing that in action.
Yeah.
But I've also seen it in many cases, just in our everyday lives when a crisis hits, when things are going wrong. We'll call it COVID, right? There's so much was going wrong at the time, so much stress. And just trying to be that calm and composed voice of just, hey, let's take a deep breath. Let's just step back and where can we pause to see what is most important? And that's what I've realized, in that moment when my airplane was plunging to the ground over Baghdad, I realized that there were so many things that I could worry about. There were so many things going wrong. I just had to focus on what was most important first. I had to just focus on that and let the rest go. There were things that I couldn't control. I couldn't think about those things. I've seen that, in dealing and leading in a crisis, right? There's so many things that you could think about. There are things out of your control. Just it's about kind of recentering, taking
Mm.
that deep breath and reminding people to focus on what's most important first. Focus on those things that you can control. As a leader, we have that responsibility to help people understand what is most important first by prioritizing and letting them, just making sure people are aware of the priorities and then just maintaining that calm demeanor of, we're going to get through this. Yes, it is hard, but we are going to get through this. It's easier said than done sometimes, though.
Of course, of course. But, I mean, the more you talk about it, the more you can help people kind of embrace that. And there's so much to be said for that power of the pause and the deep breath that you
Mhm.
could take to refocus on that present moment.
Yeah, because most of the time, there may be some occasions, but most of the time, we can stop and take that deep breath. That sometimes the best thing we can do when everything is going crazy is to do nothing. Just take that deep breath and just pause. Just let's have a conversation about it. I mean, there are those scenarios where you might have to take an immediate action, but sometimes we can just pause, take a deep breath, make sure we're taking the best action for the given situation, and then, make the best decision we can. And then if you have to adjust, then you adjust.
Yes, you course correct, right? Which
Yes.
I'm sure you talk about a lot as well. But
Yes.
you referenced this first one of these first experiences.
Yeah.
Tell us more. I mean, that was pretty intense for very, very early on in your career. So how
Yeah.
did that shape you moving into the rest of your career?
Yeah, it's been 20 years almost since that mission over Baghdad, which is just crazy to me. I mean, part of me, I remember it like it was yesterday, because it still feels very real in many ways. But what I think for me, that mission over Baghdad, we were providing support for our ground troops, which is our primary mission. And so along with my flight lead, we were going to do everything that we could to get in there to help them out. And they were taking fire. So we decided that we'd get in there quickly. We'd do a couple passes, and then kind of reassess things. And about that time where, we can see this massive firefight happening across the back and forth across the Tigris River. But we also realized that they were shooting at us too. And so we knew it was a high risk environment. We knew it was a high threat environment, but we were going to do everything that we could to help our troops out on the ground. And so we did a couple passes, weapons passes. And that's when coming off target from my last weapons pass is when I felt and heard that huge explosion at the back of the airplane. And, I knew immediately that I was hit and, um, it, The jet was not controllable. As soon as it got hit, it kind of dumped over and pointed down at Baghdad below. And, there's this moment of like, am I going to crash? Do I have to eject? Am I going to survive? But I really, again, had to focus on what was most important, which is flying that airplane and trying to get the airplane under control. And thankfully, I was able to put it in a backup emergency system and slowly start to climb up and away from Baghdad. But it was a terrifying moment. I didn't initially, I was like, oh, I didn't even have time to be scared. I just reacted. And then I went back and listened to the video and I could hear the fear in my voice when it happened. And I knew I was scared. I could hear it. And I think, what I've realized from that is even though I didn't want to admit it then, and I did not admit it after landing from that mission. I remember being asked multiple times, like, oh, were you scared? And I was like, no, I wasn't scared, right? I'm a fighter pilot, I'm invincible. But what I've realized is it's not the fear that matters, right? It's all about what you do in those moments that matter. And so I've had 20 years to reflect on that and kind of recognize that when you admit fear and you acknowledge fear, it can actually help you act with courage. So it's hard to say that I'm thankful for that moment because it was pretty terrifying and probably one of the most challenging things I've ever been through. But like we started with, sometimes those hard things, those challenging things, it builds character, it makes us stronger. I don't think I ever thought I was capable of doing something like that. So it proved to me what I was capable of doing. And then it really just set the stage for the rest of my career for leadership opportunities, for raising two kids, for being the mom at home when my husband deployed. I mean, there were so many moments of things that I learned from that mission, whether it was, the teamwork, the empowerment. There's so many different things that came out of that I guess, in many ways I am thankful that it happened early in my career. It gave me a way to prioritize and look at life a little bit differently.
Absolutely. I mean, every time you tell that story, I get the chills. I mean, and you're here 20 years
Yeah.
later, to
Yeah.
talk about it. And thanks, that I think it also really helps to describe the importance of a wingman.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I a couple days ago I got a picture of my wingman, my flight lead on that mission. We have kept in touch over the 20 years, and he was holding a picture of my book. And it was such like it just made my heart happy because it has been 20 years and he helped me get home safely on that mission. Like he made it happen. So to see him holding my book, it's like it came full circle, like it closed the loop on everything, how proud he was of me back then and how proud he is of me today. Um, but for me, it's all about just how grateful I am that I had someone with me by my side who could provide that guidance and support, who in that moment when my airplane was hit, his communication with me was clear, it was concise, and it was correct. It was exactly what I needed because I was overwhelmed.
Yeah.
He had this situational awareness that I didn't. I was just trying to get my airplane under control, but he had this awareness of the enemy was still shooting at us. He wanted me to put out countermeasures from our chaff and flare system. He, told me to fly west to get over the friendly location so that if I had to eject, maybe I would have some chance of survival. Those are things that I didn't have the time, energy, brain bites to think about, but he did. And then on the trip home, on the way back, which was 300 miles, it was about an hour of flight time. He said, Kim, you're flying a single seat fighter, and the decision is yours if you want to try to land the airplane or get it back to friendly territory and eject. And, afterwards he had said, someone asked if he was nervous about letting me make that decision. And he was like, no, she's a good pilot. I have full confidence. And the fact that he had confidence in me just gave me confidence in myself in that moment. But he believed in me. He empowered me to make my own decision. He trusted me. He had my back, like just very, very powerful. So I'm so grateful, for him and being there for me. And, I didn't make it home alone. I had a wingman by my side and it's a pretty awesome relationship between a flight when you have kind of that, I don't know, life-changing moment
Yeah.
where you're not sure if you're going to survive. To have that person by your side is really huge.
Absolutely. And I think, this carries so well into the work that you're doing now, really talking about surrounding yourself with people that you can trust
Yeah.
in the workforce.
Yeah, people that you can trust, but also people that are gonna give you the honest, right? Like an honest,
Mhm.
feedback and assessment. I mean, you wanna create that environment of trust, but part of that trust is that we are honest with each other on the good and the bad, right? We will
Yes.
hold each other accountable. We will have the courage to say, "Hey, you said you were gonna do that, and you didn't." But to create that environment, to have people around you that are willing to do that is so important.
Yes. And the fact that another lesson that your wingman gave you is, he empowered you to make decisions, right?
Yeah.
And that's when you're going to have people thriving underneath you, when you can empower them to make their own decisions in a way that
Yeah.
is safe,
Yeah,
right?
of course, right? You wanna make sure they have the training, the
Yeah.
resources, they're ready for it. But when you empower people, one, it shows them that you trust them. It also allows you as a leader to kind of focus on that bigger picture, right? To take a step back because you do trust your team. You're gonna let them do, what they do, their follow their expertise. I mean, there is some follow up and oversight of that, but I mean, you can't do it all by yourself. I mean, it's all about the team. So, put your team in a position, give them the skills, give them the training, give them the resources, and empower them to make decisions. Also, I think the other key piece here is, give them your commander's intent, as we call it, right? Talk about the why, but then let them do it.
Hmm. Yes. And that's music to, somebody who wants to grow in their ear or in their career.
Yeah,
That's exactly what they want is, let me run,
yeah,
right?
yeah. I give them the tools to do so, but let me
Mhm.
run, and then we have maybe there's some boundaries as needed,
Yeah.
and there's some every now and then we do have to rein people back in, and that's okay. But
Mhm.
I'd rather I'd rather to have my team like out there hard charging, trying new things, and I might have to say, "Hey, we're going to just take a little step back, or let's sit down and just have a quick conversation about this." Than stay in that comfort zone, not try new things, not be innovative or creative. So I think there's, it's such a powerful thing when you can trust your team, when you empower them, to make decisions, to try new things, to get outside their comfort zone. It makes a world of difference.
It does. It does. And when you're leading by example. And
Yes.
once again, you talk a lot about vulnerability and leaning into that. How can you give us some examples of how people can do that better in the workplace?
Yeah, it's almost like as a leader, you kind of have to take that little bit of leap of faith. Sometimes we say, well, I'm not going to be vulnerable until I trust the people around me. But as leaders, it's on us, right? We have to take that first step. We have to be vulnerable, and then trust comes from that. I realized that, learning from my airmen, learning from my teammates, that when I had the courage to be vulnerable, to share a little bit about me, to open myself up to uncertainty and risk, right? That created trust. And so I think it is walking around, it is talking to
Mhm.
people, it is sharing a little bit about who you are and being authentic to who you are. I mean, the conversations don't always have to be about work. We can have
Mhm.
conversations about life and how things are, and, just really taking the time to connect with people and get to know them in a very human way. Yes, that is hard in a large organization, but why not touch as many people as you can? And I think, that's one aspect of creating those connections. But vulnerability also means that we can step up in front of people and say, I made a mistake,
Yeah.
or that decision maybe wasn't the best one. I mean, I can think of times as a leader where I made a decision about something, and it was the best decision based on the information I had. We had people come together that were experts in the area. It turned out it was the wrong decision. I mean, it just wasn't the right one, and I had, it dealt with, having a certain number of people to do a certain job, and I had cut too far. We were trying to save some money,
Mhm.
and we thought that we had the right number, and I had to go back and say, "Hey, wrong decision. It's on me." Yes, a lot of people gave me their input, but it didn't matter. That was my decision. It was the wrong one, and we're just going to adjust. That's it, and having the courage to do that, to be vulnerable, to say, "That's on me." that goes a long way to just helping people see that that's okay to do that, that it is accepted, maybe not just even accepted, but expected, for us to be able to do that.
Sounds like you would be a very good advisor to many leaders right now who are thinking about cutting and how to do it without really going too far.
Yeah, and it's hard. And sometimes we make the wrong choice, right? Like we're doing the best we can. We bring in the experts, we have a conversation. These are usually decisions that don't have to be made immediately. So we have time to think about them and talk about them. And we do the risk mitigation. We talk about contingency planning. That's one of the big things that we talk about in the military is contingency planning. We we do the work to prepare. We do all our research. We practice. Practice and flying means we chair fly, which is kind of visualizing if we're in the cockpit. But I've seen this outside the cockpit as well, where we can just visualize and walk through. So we say, okay, if we're going to make a decision to cut X number of people, we're going to do a little walkthrough. We're going to visualize how this decision will impact the whole organization. And then we plan for contingencies. We kind of think through the worst case scenario. One of the things that we do is we create what we call a red team sometimes, which is a team that can kind of poke holes in your plan and ask those
Mhm.
tough questions. They're usually people that weren't involved in the planning process or the decision process. But that has been huge for me to just go through that mindset of prepare, right? Do all the work, do the research, and then practice. Like, okay, so here's what we think we're going to do. Let's do a little visualized team huddle walkthrough for it, and then think about worst case scenarios. And you do the best you can. You prepare, you practice, you plan for those contingencies, you make your decision, you execute, and then there's usually a debrief. How do we
Yeah.
do? How did that decision go? If it's not going great, then we adjust.
Right.
Um, so a
Right.
lot of those lessons I've been able to carry over, which is really has been really helpful for me to see how they carry over from the aviation military world, but now into this new public business sector as well.
Yes. And I love that because I also think that's very, you are inspiring others who come out of the military and kind of don't know where to go, right? We always hear stories of, people who are very, very successful in the military who come out and just kind of have a harder time finding their place. How did you figure out what was next for you?
Yeah, I think well, for me, I tried to retire 3 different times. So I tried it multiple times and finally found a point where I was successful at actually making the decision to retire. I think it is really hard because it's a transition. It's you for me, I've done the same thing for 24 years and I had this commitment to service in the military. I had a team, that there's this huge sense of camaraderie. And so it's hard to leave that. I mean, I had found my passion and my purpose, my why, my reason for being and
Yeah.
serving in the military. And first it was supporting our ground troops. And then as I progressed in my career, it was all about inspiring this next generation of leaders. And I wanted to be able to continue to do that in some way. So for me, even when we face these transitions in our lives, it's still about finding purpose and passion in something that we believe in. And so I thankfully have been able to find that on the outside as well in terms of, you know, being able to connect with people and help them on their own leadership journeys. Um, my advice to any transitioning military leader is always, find something that you're passionate about, find something that you love, and then ideally find a team where you have that sense of camaraderie. Find a team of people that are going to support you, whether it's in your job or in some sort of external organization that can help provide that camaraderie, because that's the hard part. It is hard to walk away from, but it is so powerful because so many of the lessons that we learned are very relevant in the business and corporate sector as well.
Absolutely. And, you bring a fresh perspective, which is, something that I think a very smart CEO would welcome, right?
Yeah, and to not be afraid to kind of share those ideas and thoughts, to give that little bit of different perspective. I mean, this is the whole point behind diversity, is like getting different ideas, giving different
Yes.
perspectives, and not shying away from that. I think so often some of our military members, like, undervalue what they've done. And the truth is they have done amazing things. They have made very tough decisions. They have led teams or kept teams together. They have been able to solve complex problems in very stressful scenarios. And those things are very much needed in today's workforce.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we're so glad that you're bringing it to the workforce for sure.
Thank you.
How can you describe or how have you attained work-life balance in this new chapter?
Ooh, attained. That's a really good question as I as I sit here with a little bit of a crazy schedule since the book launch. But
Yes.
I'm still working on it. For me, I've realized that balance is it's like it's kind of a stressful term for me. Like if I think balance is like I've got to be 50-50 balance every day, work, life. Um, First off, I can't do it. It's just not possible. So for me, I've just realized it's more of this long-term balance. Like, there are days where my schedule is going to be swamped. I'm going to be packed and everything's going on at work, or someone may need, something, or someone might need my attention at work. But I try, to make up for that later in terms of on those moments where, I really want to take my son on a field trip or something like that. I
Yeah.
try to find more long-term balance. I don't know. For me, that's just helped give myself a little bit of grace. I love, the words work-life harmony or work-life integration. Like, it doesn't always have to be so separate. It's just, honestly, it's doing the best you can and not being so hard on yourself. And I say that out loud, and it's like I need to remind myself of that every day. Like it's hard. It's hard to have, this work commitment and commitment to a spouse and kids. And how do you do it all? And I mean, honestly, I just try to do the best that I can and give myself grace when it doesn't quite go as planned.
Yes, and I like that you talk about the ebb and the flow, right? Because
Yeah.
some days are different than every day is different. And
Yes.
some days you can embrace that field trip, and other days you have to go sign a bunch of books, which
Yeah.
is both really, really good things.
Yes, it is. And yeah, and it's just I'm always learning and trying to find new ways to do it better. I mean, it's this whole idea of sharing stories and lessons, like, talking to other parents and how they do it, and what ideas they have, and what things work and what hasn't worked. And, again, that's why we share stories. That's why we share our experiences with, ideally the goal to help others.
Yeah, and then listening to, others around you, right? I mean, I know that there's times where I get caught up in work and then my son will say something to me and it will stop me in my tracks
Oh,
and
yeah.
help me to refocus.
Kids have, kids have an amazing way of doing that.
Yeah.
Um, when my husband and I were both on active duty Air Force, I was responsible for a group of 1,000 military and civilian personnel. He was responsible for a base, about 11,000 people on the base. So we were both incredibly busy. Like it was just incredible demands on our time, and we knew it, and we were struggling. Our parents were out quite frequently to help. But one day, my older son, I think he was maybe 6, 7 at the time. Our boss lived on the same street as us. And this, 6-year-olds will say whatever they want. And he told our boss that he wanted us to be fired so that we wouldn't be so busy. Yeah. It's those moments of like, yep, yeah. There are moments where I wish I was fired too, where it's, you have those times. And then my younger son, and this is probably the one that got me the most and really had me starting to think about priorities and my life and what I wanted out of it was he asked one day when we were going to be a family again because we were separated so frequently. Yeah, like dagger through the heart. I was like, oh, and that's not said out of meanness or any, that is just a child just wondering, like, we're not together very often anymore. Like, when are we going to be a family again? And oh, that hit me. That
Yeah.
hit me hard. That's
Yeah.
when, you start thinking about your priorities. And we had some pretty good conversations about what was important to us. And that's when we realized that the path that we were on wasn't going to work. And it was time to adjust.
Yeah.
And so we did.
Yeah. You planned your pivot and you did
We
it
did.
gracefully and beautifully.
Yeah, and I'm so thankful because, at the end of 24 years in the military, to be able to stand up on that stage for my retirement, which thankfully I shared with my husband. We had a joint retirement ceremony. But to stand there together with our kids next to us, like, that's what it's about, right? In the end, when all is said and done, to have the people that mean the most to me by my side, that was really important. So it's sometimes you have to pivot. Sometimes life throws obstacles and opportunities, and you just do the best you can, and you make the best decision at that time, and you hope for the best. And I'm really happy. I feel like in a very good place and very excited about what's to come.
Oh, I'm excited for you. Definitely. And, you talk about family and, your kids and the influence that they have on you. What was it like being a female in a very male dominated environment?
Yeah. I think I've just lived in that world for so long. I started at the Air Force Academy. I think we were about 16% women there. For
Mhm.
me, it was always about just going in, being credible, being good at what you do, having a good attitude, maintaining a good attitude. But I mean, I say that it's still hard. I mean, I walked into my fighter squadron on day one, and I was the only female fighter pilot in the squadron. And I put a lot of pressure on myself. I mean, these are my words. Nobody else said this to me, but I put pressure on myself to the point that, like, I felt like if I made a mistake or I failed, then I would ruin it for all the women that followed me, because it would be that Kim failed because she's a woman. That's the kind of pressure that I was putting on myself. And I realized, as I walked into that fighter squadron, yes, I was the only woman, but I looked around and many of the guys in the squadron were my classmates from the Air Force Academy, and they had watched me perform there. And I was like, you know what? This is no different. I'm going to come in here. I'm going to prove myself. I'm going to be credible. And I think the reality is, right, when any new person walks into an organization, military or civilian, there is a little bit of proving yourself, right? People are kind
Yeah,
of be like, oh, who's the new person and what do they have to bring? There is a
right.
little bit of that. And so yes, I put the pressure on myself, but I realized again, it was just about being credible. And the truth is that when I proved myself in the airplane, the guys in my squadron didn't care. The jet
Yeah,
doesn't care. I mean, the
yeah,
jet doesn't know the difference. And so
yeah,
the fact that the guys in my squadron just wanted me to be a credible, capable pilot, and I proved that. And then we flew to combat, and I proved it there. It didn't matter after that. It really didn't. I have spent, my entire career being in this male-dominated environment, but honestly, these are my brothers, and they would do anything for me, and I would do the same for them.
yeah. I love that. And it's funny because I did not, fly planes or anything, but in business school,
Of
there
course.
were
Yeah.
probably 20% women, the rest men, and I got
Yeah.
put into a study group. It was 6 guys and me. And at first I was like, "Oh, what does this mean?" And what we learned is just to lean on each other's strengths and to
Yeah.
really appreciate each other's strengths and what each of us brought to the table. And that was not about being a male or female. That was being about being once again a human, right?
Being a human, yeah. And I think sometimes it's just that initial discomfort of like, well, how do we act around Mary? Like, what is she
Yeah,
going to bring? And
yeah,
what do we say? How do we act? I think that was initially it. Was there was some of this like, well, I've never flown with a girl before. And I'm like, well, I think I maybe look a little bit different. I might sound different on the radio, but other than that, I think we're going to be okay. So it was just kind
yeah.
of like leading with this, like, I can do the work just like you all can.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Well, you have so many nuggets and so many words of wisdom in your book. Do you have any, maybe top 3 or final tips that you wanna leave us with?
Top 3. I think it really goes back to this idea that it is okay to feel fear. It is okay to feel nervous. It is okay to feel anxious, but you still have to do something with it. It is about taking action when you're afraid. It's about having the courage to do those hard things. And sometimes I think we put so much pressure on ourselves and we have these such high expectations of what we should be thinking or feeling. And the reality is that whatever you're thinking or feeling is okay, but now you need to step up and take action, right? It's what you do when you are scared that matters. I think as leaders, we often face fear in our organizations about the challenges we're facing. And it is about leading with courage. It is about doing the hard things. It is about embracing the fear and taking action.
I love that. You make me want to take action right now and
I love it.
do something really brave. So Kim, tell us where we can find your book.
Yeah, so the book is now available at really any of your favorite local booksellers or online, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, you name it. It's now out in the wild. I walked in and I saw it at a store in Barnes and Noble, and I have to say it was pretty cool to see that. So, yeah, really exciting. It's really available anywhere you would like to buy books. And please reach out if if you're listening and you have some questions, or if you've read the book and you want to share something that you learned or liked or didn't like. Please reach out. I would love that.
Or hire you as an advisor.
Well, there is that too. That would also be possible. So,
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. Please reach out.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. It was just such a pleasure to see you again. And I'm celebrating all of your successes with you. I'm really excited for what your future holds.
Thank you so much, Mary. I appreciate it.